Okay, so every time we start factoring, we always want to look for a GCF. So between these four terms, there is nothing that they all four have in common. And since there are four terms, we are going to start grouping. So between the first two terms, our GCF would be 4x squared. When we take 4x squared out, we're left with x plus 7. When we look at the second two terms, the GCF is negative 7. And when we take a negative 7 out, we're left with x plus 7. So we have successfully found matching expressions inside the parentheses. That becomes our first factor. And when we take both of those out, we are left with 4x squared minus 7. And that's your answer for the first one. So this would be factoring by grouping. Okay, let's look at 9n squared minus 4. So we look and we see if there's a GCF. There's not a greatest common factor between these two terms. And since it's a binomial, we are going to factor using the difference of squares method. So we need to find two numbers that will multiply to 9n squared. That would be 3n and 3n. And then we need to find two numbers that will multiply to give us negative 4, negative 2, and positive 2. So that's that one. Then let's look at x squared minus 6x plus 5. We look and we notice that there's not a greatest common factor between all three of these terms. And since it's a trinomial, we have to identify if the a value is 1 or if the a value is not 1. Here our a value, the term or the coefficient in front of the variable that's being squared, is 1. So all we need to do is we need to find two numbers that will multiply to our c value. Remember a, b, c. It needs to multiply to our c value, but add up to our b value. So 5 times 1 would give us positive 5, but those wouldn't add up to positive 6. So that's not going to work. Negative 5 and negative 1 will multiply to positive 5, and those will add up to negative 6. So those are our two terms, and we're just going to take those two terms and put those in factored form. So x minus 5 times x minus 1. Okay, and the last one, 4x squared plus 11x plus 6. Or actually, I'll do two more. Okay. So we look and there's not a greatest common factor between all three terms. It's still a trinomial. However, this time our a value is 4. So our a value does not equal 1. So we have to take our a value and multiply it to our c value. So 4 times 6 gives us 24. Now we need to find two numbers that will multiply to 24 but add to 11. So 6 times 4 would give us 24, but 6 plus 4 is 10. That does not equal our b value, so those do not work. 12 and 2 will multiply to 24, but those do not add up to 11, so those do not work. So 8 and 3, 8 times 3 is 24. 8 plus 3 is 11. So those are our two factors. However, since our a value is not 1, we have to take our middle term and split it up into the two factors that we just found. So we're going to rewrite our equation, replacing our b value with the two numbers that we just found. So 4x squared plus 8x plus 3x plus 6. So I've not changed the value of the expression at all. I've just rewritten the middle term. Now that we have four terms, we're going to go back to grouping. So between the first two terms, our greatest common factor would be 4x, and we're left with x plus 2. And our greatest common factor between the second two terms would be 3, and we're left with x plus 2. So just like the first problem that I did, we have successfully found the same expression inside both parentheses. That becomes our first factor, and we're left with 4x plus 3. So now we have factored that one. Okay, and then the last one, this one is for real, the last one. 10x cubed minus 7x squared minus 6x. Okay, looking at these three terms, they all have something in common. They all have an x in common. So we can go ahead and take that x out, and we're left with 10x squared minus 7x minus 6. Now inside the parentheses, we have a trinomial, and our a value is not 1. Our a value is 10. So just like in the problem we just did, we're going to have to take the 10 and multiply it to the negative 6, and we get negative 60. Now we have to find two numbers that will multiply to negative 60, but add up to negative 7. So let's try, we can do negative 30 and positive 2. Does that work? No. So those are not going to add up to negative 7. We could do positive 12 and negative 5. Do those add up to negative 7? No, those add up to positive 7. So we can do negative 12 and positive 5, and when we add those up, we do get negative 7, so those are going to be our two factors. We're going to leave our greatest common factor of x on the outside. We can't do anything else with that. But now we're going to rewrite the inside of the parentheses, and we're going to take this middle term and we're going to split it up into these two terms that we just found. So we have 10x squared minus 12x plus 5x minus 6. Again, I have not changed the value of the expression at all. I've just rewritten the two middle terms. So now inside the parentheses, I can start grouping. So x stays on the outside. That's the big GCF. Now inside the parentheses, the GCF between the first two terms is 2x, and I'm left with 5x minus 6. So again, we have a big GCF on the outside, the little GCF on the inside of the parentheses. Now between the second two terms, our GCF is 1. They don't have anything in common, and we're left with 5x minus 6. Our inside, our little parentheses match. So we have a greatest common factor of x on the outside. Our first factor is the expression in both parentheses, which is 5x minus 6. And then we're left with 2x plus 1.